please welcome Michelle Baxter Wickham and Abigail Penny. Both are from Animal Equality. Michelle works with companies to make meaningful animal protection policies, focusing on their better chicken commitment. She has a wealth of experience in the NGO and government sectors, advocating for both animals and humans. She will be joined by her colleague Abigail Penny, and they will present A Chicken's Tale, Evoking Empathy Through Storytelling. So please welcome both speakers, and the room is yours.
Thank you very much, Martin. I feel like it's probably not really going to live up to those expectations of being funny in any way, but we'll do our best to at least try and make sure that it's not incredibly harrowing for anybody. So it may not be the most uplifting, but we'll do our best. As Martin's very kindly already mentioned, we will be talking about A Chicken's Tale and how you can evoke empathy amongst the public and also through influential people through storytelling. So a little bit about me very briefly. I'm the Executive Director of Animal Equality UK. Prior to this, I was the Operations Manager at Animal Equality, and then prior to that, I had a successful career in project management. I studied psychology, which helps in my day-to-day workings, but also allows me to craft strategies that help to engage the public, engage influential people, and get them to change their behaviour or their attitude towards animals. And then lastly, as I'm sure all of you are, I'm passionate about defending animals, and I've been vegan for about 5 to 6 years now. Over to you, Michelle.
Thank you, and thanks for the introduction, Martin. Again, I think you may have built up the jokes. I'm not sure how many of those are in here, but we'll try. So hi everyone, my name's Michelle and I'm the Corporate Outreach Manager for Animal Equality in the UK. As Martin said, I work with companies to adopt meaningful animal welfare policies, so working on the corporate relations side, and my current focus is chickens. I've also been rehoming rescue chickens for the past 5 years, which I'll talk more about later. But basically my home life and my work life mean I get to talk about and live chickens 24/7. And so the key objectives for today, by the end of the session, hopefully you'll have a greater understanding of the struggles that chickens used for meat face. I'll be interchanging meat chickens and chickens used for meat. We prefer the latter, but for ease, I'll use both. And hopefully you'll be able to use psychological theories to evoke empathy in others when raising awareness about the plight of these wonderful animals.
So for those of you who don't already know, Animal Equality is a leading international animal protection organisation. So we work with government, society and corporations to enact meaningful changes for farmed animals. We're also an effective altruist organisation. So what that means is our strategy is very much focused on those animals that are suffering the most. And what we mean by the most is the scale, the severity and the intensity of their suffering. So as you can see on the slide here, over 69 billion chickens are killed every year by humans. Right now, there are billions of them living on our planet, and technically you could possibly consider them as one of the most successful species in the history of animals. It began as a rare bird in Southeast Asia, and now we have around 23 billion chickens in the world at this very moment, which is around 3 chickens for every human. But while they might have conquered the world, they definitely didn't choose to do that, and their lives are very dismal and very miserable, as I'm sure most of you will be aware. So in the UK, around 90 to 95% of chickens are living in intensive conditions. They're very much hidden away from society, crammed into these multi-storey sheds by tens of thousands, when typically they would be in flocks of 10 to 12. And as it says on the screen, a pretty shocking fact is that if humans died at the same rate that we kill animals for food, we would be extinct in less than 20 days. So, given the scale of the problem, why is it that people don't seem to care more? Well, ultimately, when you're looking at psychological theory behind this, it comes down to 2 concepts. So one is empathy and one is compassion. They're very tightly interlinked, and they're actually significantly and positively correlated as well. So what we mean by the notion of empathy is ultimately our capacity to connect with another being at an emotional level. Whereas compassion is instead expressing concern for the suffering of others and is much more associated with the motivation to help. And that is, of course, what we're trying to ignite in people and achieve when we're getting to inspire people to take action. So if we want people to be compassionate, to support our campaigns, to change their diets, then ideally we want them to also gain empathy. So what are some of the reasons as to why people are not necessarily immediately or instinctively empathizing with chickens, given the scale of their suffering? Well, we've put 4 points here based on psychological theory. There may be others, but these are 4 that are very prominent and very relevant to the issues that we all face within our movement. So one is scope neglect. And ultimately, this means that the scale of the problem is just simply too large for humans to actually get their head around. There's psychological theory to evidence that we simply cannot understand the gravity or the seriousness of these numbers. So if you're trying to compare the difference between a million, a billion, and a trillion, you know, we talk about trillions of fish, billions of chickens, millions of cows, then actually that all sounds very similar. They all seem like similar words, and so therefore it's not so easy for people to really engage with those concepts. But it would actually take almost 12 days for a million seconds to go by and 31 years for a billion seconds to go by. A trillion seconds ago, there was no written history. So this really does show the absolute enormity of the scale that we're talking about here. The second point, which probably again most of you will have already heard referenced at some point or another, is cognitive dissonance. And this is our apparent disconnect between not wanting animals to suffer and yet still killing them and consuming them for food. And of course, we also know that many animals are also used or exploited in other ways as well. So the reason that this is done is based on our belief system as humans, which is made up of 3 parts. So the first part is denial. So as I mentioned before, if you keep them out of sight, then you will also keep them out of mind and therefore out of your consciousness. Secondly is justification. So we're taught from a very young age that it's natural, normal, and necessary to consume animals, and therefore we're internalizing these myths throughout our entire lives. And then lastly, cognitive dissonance. So we see animals as objects, not as individuals, and therefore we treat them as such. Which brings me on to the next point of objectification. And this really shows the power of words, the power of language. So language has an incredibly strong link with our thoughts, and both of them intertwine. So if you don't have the language, you can't actually have those thoughts, and vice versa. So by breaking animals down into pieces of meat, then we're actually de-animating and objectifying them in the process. So by dismembering them physically, we are actually also dismembering the individual and their identity as a chicken and as a sentient being that wants to live and feels pain and feels joy. And then the last one, which I think is particularly interesting, is actually not often discussed or not discussed enough, is actually anthropomorphism. And this is ultimately our ability, whether it's real or assumed, to connect emotionally with other organisms. And what it comes down to typically is their external features and whether or not we intuitively feel that they are human-like. So the closer they are as a species to us, either genetically or perceived through their behaviors or through their presumed intentions, then the more likely we are to respond in a human-like manner and have empathy for those animals. The reason that we have this in place is because all different living organisms obviously affect humans in a different way. So we therefore need to treat them differently. So if they are of a different size or they're expressing some sense of vulnerability, then we might see them as either a potential predator, a competitor, one of us, or perhaps a valuable resource. So the more they look and act like us, then the more likely we are to show empathy towards them and altruistic, compassionate behavior towards them. And this actually reminded me when I was putting this together of dog breeding. So as I'm sure you'll have noticed, more and more as the years have gone by, dogs are being bred to have enormous eyes and tiny snouts. The reason for this, is because it then makes them much more human-like, much more vulnerable looking, and therefore we're more easily able to identify with them and engage, empathize, and show compassion. Obviously, dog breeding is a whole new presentation for an entirely different day and has many, many problems of its own. But what it does show is that in comparison to chickens, chickens actually don't even have eyelashes, for example, and that makes it much harder naturally for people on an instinctive level to therefore engage and show empathy for them.
So Abby's obviously explained the kind of background to why it's difficult to empathise with chickens. I'm going to try and convince you that chickens are amazing animals. Most of you already know that, so hopefully you don't need too much convincing. But I'll explain why it's so important that we stand up for them. So the myths about chickens have been debunked over recent years, but people still use derogatory terms for humans like bird-brained or chicken if somebody's scared. So frustratingly, the message isn't quite getting through. Chickens have cognitive, emotional, and social abilities equal to those of many, equal to those of many mammals. And their natural behaviours survive no matter what they're put through by the farming industry. They peck, forage, and perch from hatching and start preening as they grow older, just like their wild forebears, the jungle fowl. So chickens are logical thinkers. They remember past events to make critical decisions, and they demonstrate self-control. They can complete complex mental tasks, such as simple arithmetic. They learn from observing one another and even pass cultural knowledge from generation to generation. Chickens have the ability to feel pain, fear, frustration, boredom, and happiness, so are very much sentient beings. Chickens form complex social structures known as pecking orders or hierarchies, and they literally do that by pecking each other. And each chicken naturally asserts his or her place on the social ladder. They also show signs of strategy by trying to improve their status among the group. Chickens can recognise the face and ranks of more than 100 other birds, and they also demonstrate signs of empathy when other birds are in distress. And we've found that when we've had a sick bird or we've had to take one to the vet and sadly they don't come home with us, the other chickens go into mourning. That's the only way of describing it. For a day, a couple of days, they're lost without them. And in terms of communication, hens communicate with their young during incubation by clucking softly, and the chick responds by chirping back from inside the shell. They can let mum know if they're too hot or too cold. Chickens have more than 30 vocalizations, including purring and different alerts for danger, whether it's approaching on land or from the air. So they really are complex, incredible beings. So the main welfare concerns, bear in mind all the things I've just said about how great chickens are. So as Abby mentioned, intensively farmed chickens suffer immensely throughout their short lives, both in terms of scale and the severity of suffering. The whole process, from incubation through to death, is full of problems. However, the key welfare concerns that I'll touch upon today relate to breed, stocking density, and slaughter. And these are also the key areas that we focus on when we're talking about the Better Chicken Commitment or European Chicken Commitment. So in terms of breed, chickens have been selectively bred over years to grow bigger, quicker, reaching slaughter weight in just 6 weeks, compared with 13 weeks in 1950. You can see in this image the detrimental impact that such intense breeding has had. It's completely changed the shape and size of chickens. If a human baby grew at the same rate, they would weigh 28 stone at 3 years old. So just let that sink in for a minute. So the breed causes a number of problems, the first of which is immobility. Approximately 25% of chickens within every production cycle have mobility issues caused by selective breeding. They appear top heavy due to the forced development of the pectoral muscles, which alters their position and affects mobility. This in turn creates more stress for the pelvis and legs, which are already weakened by the selective breeding and genetic deformities. Standing causes them discomfort and pain, so they spend less time walking, foraging and pecking, and instead spend more time sitting, eating and drinking. This doesn't mean that they're not naturally inclined to express those behaviours, just that they don't have the physical ability to do so. They can suffer from a range of deformities as listed here, and that includes severe lameness, osteonecrosis and arthritis, so problems with their bones. Their immobility can also lead to death from starvation or dehydration, as they're unable to move and reach the feeders and drinkers. Now, metabolic diseases are also very common in fast-growing breeds due to the accelerated muscle and tissue growth compared to the blood and oxygen supply, putting pressure on the heart and circulation. Ascites, also known as water belly, is caused by fluid accumulating in the abdomen. Chickens in the advanced stages can be seen gasping, they're cyanotic, which means they're a blue tinge, and they're unable to move. Sudden death syndrome, or flip-over disease as it's also known, is estimated to cause mortality in 0.5 to 4% of meat chickens. It's triggered by cardiac arrest and is characterised by birds violently flapping their wings, extending their neck, squawking and dying literally within minutes. Myopathy is a disease of the muscle which affects meat quality as well as the health of the bird. So a few of these: green muscle disease is caused by lack of blood supply to the muscle fibres, which causes the fibres to die. You may have seen images posted on social media over Christmas by people who were disgusted that their cheap supermarket chicken was an unappetizing green colour, and this seems to be becoming more and more common. Woody or wooden breast is a hardening of the muscle, and white striping of fatty deposits within the meat. Research is ongoing into the health impacts of these diseases on humans, although a study from 2018 found that the occurrence of white striping led to increased carbonylation levels, which some researchers say could play a role in the progression of some cancers. And lastly, approximately 20% of meat chickens suffer from skin problems. Ammonia burns are common on the chest, the hocks, so underneath, and their feet, and are caused by prolonged contact between a chicken's skin and filthy litter, which is often unchanged during the production cycle, or in some cases, for example in the US, for up to a whole year. These burns cause pain and are also a gateway for bacterial infections such as Staphylococcus and E. coli. The ammonia can also cause eye irritation and breathing difficulties, and again, that stays with them throughout their life, even if they survive the farm. Stocking density is another reason for immobility and skin problems amongst chickens. When they're crammed together, they have less room to move and the litter becomes soiled more quickly. The current maximum stocking density allowed in the EU is 42 kilograms per metre squared. So that equates to about 21 birds when they're nearing their slaughter weight. So again, if you can imagine that, that's a vast number of birds in a small space. Bear in mind that tens, sometimes hundreds of thousands of birds are housed together. They have less room than hens in cages and are unable to express their natural behaviours. Scientists agree that several welfare issues can be avoided with a substantially reduced stocking density to about 25 kilograms per metre squared or less.
20 minutes have passed.
Thank you, Martin. And finally, water bath stunning or slaughter. So, the most widespread stunning method for chickens, used in approximately 80% of cases, is an electrified water bath. It's a fast method, enabling workers to process 140 to 180 birds per minute. However, it does come with serious welfare concerns and isn't 100% effective. Rough handling leads to broken wings and bones. Live inversions, where the chickens are removed from the crates, hung upside down by their feet in metal shackles, causes breathing problems. Birds and chickens don't have a diaphragm separating the thorax and the abdomen, so the lungs are crushed by other organs. Birds can receive a pre-stun shock, so if their wing catches the water first. Others, if you know chickens, they don't always do what you expect them to or what you want them to. Other chickens raise their head and they miss the bath entirely. There's also a risk that the voltage is kept too low, usually to avoid scarring the body. Furthermore, the US Department of Agriculture estimates that over 800,000 chickens, known as red birds, were unintentionally boiled alive each year because they reached the scalding tanks without being stunned or killed by the kill blade.
So over the years, Animal Equality has released a number of investigations revealing a lot of the issues that Michelle has just raised within chicken farms in practice and in reality. These aren't just scientific concepts, these are the experiences, the lived experiences, in fact, of the chickens that are dying every year. And we're seeing more and more that companies are simply prioritizing profit, prioritizing money over any form of mercy. And these animals are just living incredible hardships throughout their entire lives. So just this past week, we actually revealed scenes from 8 Red Tractor certified British chicken farms, all of which were operated by Moy Park, which is one of the UK's largest chicken producers. It's also one of the largest top 10 poultry chicken producers in Europe as well. And we found, scenes showing all of the signs of the issues that Michelle was raising. So many of them simply because these companies are prioritizing money. So for example, we found severe overcrowding where the birds were just being crammed, they could barely stand, they could barely move. Similarly, selectively bred chickens where they're just growing far too quickly, far too big over a very short period of time. They were suffering from lameness, from hock burns, breathing difficulties, early death. And then on top of that, something that we hadn't actually experienced in the past was noticing that the companies were intentionally and deliberately actually depriving the smaller chickens of water. And the reason that they were doing this was because those chickens were not seen to be big enough or meaty enough to be profitable to the industry. So therefore, the way that it works is the water drinkers are routinely raised to such great heights that the smaller birds simply cannot reach them. They're so far away. And you can see on that left image there just how far the chickens actually are. Even when they're held and stretched, there's no way that they were going to ever be able to reach that water. And as you can see from one of the workers' quotes there, they admitted themselves in covert conversations that there's no point in feeding it. It's cheaper to get rid of it and kill it, because at the end of the day, for this industry, it's about making money. So one way that we can help to evoke empathy amongst the general public is by showing this reality, by highlighting and informing consumers of these issues with that scientific backing that we have to help them actually empathize with the animals' experiences. A second way that you can also evoke that emotion is by helping people relate not only to the chicken's experiences, but also in relation to their own. So 3 examples that we have here, one of which is actually confinement. So as everybody will have been experiencing over the past few months, we've all, no doubt, understandably struggled during lockdown and had the experience that chickens will live throughout their entire lives. Being trapped indoors, unable to carry out their natural behaviours, and also not understanding why, and also it's not necessary. So this is a really useful tool for us to be able to highlight to people what their experience must be like and just how vulnerable and defenceless they actually are. A second one is the heat wave. So in the UK, we've had what I would describe as a hideous heat wave. I did not enjoy it at all, and it was just boiling hot temperatures over the past few days, and I imagine it's been the same across most of Europe. And again, it reminds us of the experiences that the chickens are often facing in these boiling hot barns. They're overcrowded, their body temperature rises, and therefore if they don't have adequate ventilation in the barns, then there will be high numbers of deaths. And we actually saw this time last year when there were soaring temperatures. We found that there were thousands of chickens, again, on a Moy Park farm, where Moy Park is responsible for raising and slaughtering 312 million birds per year. And they didn't even actually invest in adequate ventilation for these animals, and therefore thousands died an early death because of it. And then lastly, the pandemic risk is a useful way for us to sensitively and appropriately highlight to people that actually the exploitation of animals and the way in which we're engaging with them actually not only is dangerous and detrimental to those animals, but it's also posing very serious global health threats. And one thing that's worth being aware of is actually avian flu. So when it comes to chicken, there's actually a particularly worrying strain of avian flu called H5N1. And this has been bothering health officials for decades now, so much so that, as you can see on the screen, the World Health Organization actually currently, as of February 2020, most recently updated, has a pandemic preparedness document for avian flu, because they do recognize this could lead to another potential pandemic. So the way that it's come about is, again, because we're confining these animals into these filthy and unhygienic, overcrowded spaces. And in the past, that has then caused the virus to mutate and jump to humans. In humans, it has a 60% fatality rate. So if H5N1 were to mutate again, then it could certainly cause efficient and very swift infection of humans. And one thing that's also worth noting is that avian flu also has the potential to infect wild birds, and so therefore it would be incredibly difficult for us to contain the spread of the virus. So of course we don't want to go out there and start to scaremonger or cause panic, but it's important that people do realise the experiences of these animals are experiences that we need to empathise with and better understand, using the science, but also using psychological behaviours in order to really evoke that emotion. And so lastly, Michelle is going to swoop in with the third and final solution in terms of helping us to engage with these animals on an individual level, not seeing them as a number, not seeing them as billions, but rather as the very sweet individuals that they are.
Thank you, Abby. So yeah, as you said, this is another way of helping people relate to chickens, is by telling their stories about the ones who escaped their destiny. I've had to keep this much shorter than I would normally. I could have talked about this for the whole presentation, but I think you might have got a bit bored. So welcome to E17 Chickens. We're a small backyard flock of rescued chickens living the high life in East London, along with our sister Sol the cat, who just managed to sneak in the corner there. It was actually my husband who wanted to have chickens. I wasn't so keen, and then he showed me a video of a caged hen walking on grass for the first time, very similar to ones that many of you will have already seen. And that was it. There was no turning back for either of us. So we started taking in hens rescued from the egg industry. So they'd reached the end of their laying life, about 18 months old, and were considered sort of no longer useful. We were amazed at how they transformed from scared, scrawny birds into confident, feathered troublemakers. We then had the opportunity to take in meat chickens who were due to be slaughtered, literally sort of about half an hour after they came to us. I'd seen photographs and watched videos of such chickens, but at that time I didn't fully believe or understand the issues. However, being confronted with a blue-eyed, cheeping, obese chick who couldn't stand really brought it to life for me. We currently only have 2 chicken residents. So our big, beautiful boy, Dottie, who came to us at 6 weeks old from a meat farm. We were convinced that he was a girl until the day he started crowing. He's now 20 months old and weighs over 8 kilos. So he is a very big boy, and he takes life very slowly these days. We also have inquisitive little Dina, a retired ex-commercial hen who's around 18 months old, and she's a bundle of energy. Dottie is Dina's protector, so from us and actual predators like foxes who do like to come into the garden. He wakes her and everyone else up in the morning, and he waits for her to go to bed at night, and they're both inseparable. Sadly, whilst our chickens escaped the farm didn't escape them. So all have suffered as a result of their breed or the conditions in which they were kept, whether that's their size, breathing difficulties, what caused their life to end, it stayed with them. Only 1 or 2 made it to old age, although many lived much longer than expected. When we first got our meat chickens, we were told we'd be lucky if they lived 6 months, and 2 of them lived for 18 months. We take comfort in knowing that they at least had a name, they had love, they had freedom, and people knew them. So we use social media to try and show people their stories, their individual characters, and their likes and dislikes. We encourage people to connect with chickens and rethink their choices. This wasn't our intention when we started rehoming. We just wanted to give the girls a happy retirement and for others to share in their joy. But it quickly became clear that the chickens were their own most powerful tool in changing hearts and minds. And a couple of years ago, we had the opportunity to reach an even wider audience when Animal Equality made a film about our little family. So I'll share it with you now. I hope this works, and it's only a couple of minutes long, but hopefully you enjoy it.
3 years ago, we started rehoming chickens, and since then, 12 beautiful girls have come through our doors and changed our lives forever. We saved Paula, Missy and Katie when they were due to go to slaughter at 18 months old. They were no longer considered useful for the egg industry, so we were able to take them in and give them a happy retirement. So all of the girls, when they came to us, were in a very sorry state. They were very skinny, they hardly had any feathers. Some of them were terrified of kind of human beings, of each other, and just didn't know how to react. Paula especially was terrified of everyone, of everything. She just hid in the back of the coop for a couple of weeks. Whenever we went to go near her, she'd make a funny little squeaking sound. You look at her now and it's a completely different chicken. Within a couple of weeks, they all started to display their natural behaviours that were deprived on farms, and really came into their own and showed their personalities. We then rescued 3 chickens who were raised for meat. They came to us at 6 weeks old, so they were due to go off to be slaughtered. Thankfully, we had the chance to take them in. They all struggled to walk because of their unnatural size. They're bred to put on weight very quickly, and City especially couldn't stand up, which is why we affectionately named her that. All of the girls have amazed me with their personalities, their behaviours, their funny little quirks. They make me laugh every day. I was really surprised to kind of see how much they would change over time. And I'm just really grateful that we've had the opportunity to sort of be part of that, but also that we can show the world what amazing creatures they are. By going vegan, you can save chickens like Paula, Missy, Katie, City and Eddie from the awful life they had before we rescued them. So please, please leave animals off your plate.
So that's just a taster. Get that back. Just a taster of E17 chickens. If you want to know more, if you want to follow their lives, then you can go to at E17 chickens on Instagram. And obviously, if you want to follow up more about the investigations that Abby's been talking about, see what Animal Equality's been up to, then you can follow us and sort of go to our website at animalequality.org.uk. Thank you very much for listening, everyone. That's it from us. So I think we should now have time for some questions.
Thank you. I think we have plenty of time for questions. I think it's 16 minutes. So short reminder or quick reminder, please post your questions to Slido. You can see the instructions in the Zoom group chat, and please keep your mics muted. So let's check the questions. There are none so far. So please make sure you are posting your questions to the correct rooms. This is room A. And in the meantime, if you have anything you would like to add, now is a good time for that before first questions pop in.
We got away with this lightly.
No one probably expected to end it so quickly, so time to formulate questions. Oh, we have a first one. It's what age do chickens live to naturally?
So I'll take that one. It depends on the breed. So purebred chickens can live for sort of 5 to 10 years. Obviously, in the farming industry, meat chickens are usually killed at around 6 weeks. It can be less, it can be a little bit more, but that's the average. And as I said in the presentation, chickens used for eggs live to around 18 months, sometimes 2 years. But yeah, so much shorter than their natural life. The longest one of our chickens has lived, she was an egg-laying chicken called Paula, and she lived to about 4.5 years.
Okay, so far there is no new question, but I have one. Maybe can you tell me how big is the difference between a broiler chicken and layer hen? Like, the first difference is the age, how quick they grow and how long can they live. But what are maybe the main differences anatomically, or I'm not really sure how to frame the question. So I leave that up to you.
Sorry, Martin, you broke up a little bit at the beginning. So it's compared to a broiler chicken and a
layer hen.
layer
I
hen.
know the age is the difference because the broilers don't usually live up that long, but I'm really curious about if you compare them at the same age level, or maybe if they were capable of living 5 or 10 years, how different they would be.
Yeah, so actually the ones we've got at the moment, so Dottie, who is now 20 months old, he weighs 8 kilograms, so he's, as I said, a very big boy. And Dina, who is the egg-laying hen, she's about 18 months, and she's about sort of 1.75 to 2 kilos. Dottie is quite unusual. He, as I said, he's a boy. He's also very big. But yeah, so meat chickens at slaughter weight, they would normally be about 2.5 kilos at 6 weeks old, whereas a hen would be sort of 2 kilos or less at 18 months old.
Okay.
And in terms of, I'll explain a bit more about their kind of size and shape. So they're basically 2 different breeds. And again, a lot of people outside of the movement don't realize this. They don't know that there's egg-laying hens and meat chickens. So meat chickens are bred, as I said, to put on weight very quickly. They're also specifically bred to have larger breast meat. So as I said, they're very top heavy. They're much bigger, they're much heavier generally. Egg-laying chickens are bred to put all of their energy into laying eggs. So they're often very, very small, very scrawny. It means that bones can break more easily because they're not as developed.
Okay, thank you. We have questions pouring in already. So what do we have here? Hi girls, can you elaborate on caring for broiler chickens? I assume they have to be kept on a diet.
They certainly do, yeah. So when we first started getting chickens, I was like, right, I understand how chickens operate. And then we started getting the broilers, and as I said, they're completely different. They tend to just want to eat the whole time. They don't have a stop mechanism. And I tend to describe it, if you've got a child who's got a bowl of sweets in front of them and shoves all the sweets into their mouth, that's what broiler chickens tend to do. So they'll just eat and eat and eat. The food will be falling out. They will carry on. So we tend to feed them a diet of salad and tomatoes, so kind of lettuce, tomatoes, vegetables, that kind of thing. The hens tend to eat pellets, which is a kind of specially produced food for them. And if we do feed pellets to the broilers, so commercial food to the broilers, we have to put it in, give them a set amount, and then take it away. We can't just leave it in the run or in the coop for them to kind of keep eating. That does tend to slow down. So as I said, Dottie is now 20 months old. He seems to have lost that desire to just keep eating all the time. He does have a stop mechanism. But yeah, if they were just allowed to eat and eat and eat, they would just grow even bigger and obviously have more problems.
Okay, thank you. Another question from Christina. Have you noticed any differences in behaviors of ex-broilers and ex-layers? Do they get along?
Yeah, so the difference really, egg layers tend to be much more inquisitive and want to explore and kind of just move around a lot more. They're much more flighty as well, so they will try and run away and that kind of thing. Broilers do tend to sort of just sit around a bit more. When they're babies, and if they're given the opportunity, they will run around, they will chase food, that kind of thing. In terms of them getting on, yeah, they do. We weren't sure when we brought Dina home, how Dottie would react with her. We kept them separate because he's so much bigger. We thought he might attack her, we weren't sure. But actually, as I said, he's turned into her protector. But it's the same as any chickens. Some get on, some don't. So you always have to have that integration period, start them off separately, then bring them together once they're used to each other. Sometimes you'll have a chicken that just does not get on with another, but I haven't really noticed that it's broilers versus egg layers. It just depends on the individual chicken.
Thank you. Question from Tracy. Are chickens that are marketed as organic raised in better or human conditions?
Oh, sorry, you broke up again, Martin.
Okay, once again. Are chickens that are marketed as organic raised in better or more humane conditions?
Yep, I can take that one. So free range and organic, it simply means that they have outside space, they're not routinely given antibiotics, that kind of thing. So it's not really more humane. They tend to have more space to move around, but they can still be the same breeds, which, as I said, comes with its own problems. So it's always difficult to answer this because the actual answer is all chickens suffer in some way. Free range or organic do live a slightly nicer life. I suppose that's the easiest way of saying it. In terms of egg layers, what I've noticed when I've rehomed them, the caged birds tend to be much more scared of everything. They're quieter, they're more withdrawn. Physically, they look awful as well. Free range birds have a bit more confidence. They're not as psychologically damaged, but they are still as physically damaged. So they're always scrawny, they haven't got feathers, etc. And that's what actually convinced me to go vegan when we started rehoming free range birds. And I realized actually the problems are inherent in the system. It's not just caged or free range. It's the whole industry that has these problems.
I think as well, just to add to that, since we're storytelling today, I think it's really valuable to actually, when you're carrying out outreach with people or talking about these issues, that you think about the chickens and their natural behaviors as well, because actually they originally came as jungle fowl and therefore they don't like to be outside in the broad daylight, just in a barren condition. They actually want to be under palm trees or in the shade. So actually a lot of the time when you see marketing such as free range, it's not quite what you would expect it to be, because actually it doesn't give the chickens what they naturally would want anyway. So I wouldn't disagree at all with anything Michelle said. She's absolutely right. If you're looking at the differences, there are some improvements, but nevertheless it's absolutely so far from being what these chickens would naturally want in their own lives. And also another interesting little bit of information that we found out was that, again, because of this pecking order, a lot of the time you'll find that there are chickens at the gateway where others will want to go out. So if they're not too exhausted from being selectively bred and therefore unable to barely walk anyway, the ones that do manage to stagger outside may not even get out past the door, because you're going to have these other chickens that are really feisty and are not having any of it, and they're not going to let them get past. So it's super cute and really sweet, but it also highlights that, you know, these animals are animals, they're interacting with each other, and therefore it's not all just going to be as straightforward as these industries like to make it appear.
And I'll just also add a couple of things in terms of egg layers as well. Obviously all boys born into the egg industry are slaughtered within sort of 24 hours usually, unless they're going to be used for breeding. So regardless of whether they're free ranged, caged, barn, that happens across the board. And also slaughter, again, there aren't different slaughterhouses for caged or free range birds, so they all go through the same slaughter process, which, as we've explained, is not very nice to say the least.
Thank you. There's one question that I apparently skipped. It is, I think oh no, that's the statement that I skipped the question. Sorry about that. What do you do with the eggs laid by rescue chicken? Do you leave them alone?
That's a very good question. So when we first got them, obviously I was vegetarian, but so still ate eggs. So I would eat them. Now we tend to give them back to them. So they really enjoy them. It helps return the nutrients to their bodies. So yeah, either just sort of throw them in the coop so they can then sort of scrabble around, or sometimes I do cook them up because it's they like that as well, which is disgusting for me, but good for the chickens. So yeah, they go back to them.
Okay, another Slido question. Are egg-laying hens eventually sent to slaughter for consumption, or only the ones bred for meat?
Yeah, they are. Basically, short and sweet answer, yes. Once they come to the end of their life, which is typically around 1.5 years old within the industry, then at that point they're not producing as many eggs as they might have been when they were younger and had just started, and therefore, as is the theme of this talk, it's not profitable for the industry, and therefore they send them straight to slaughter. So at that point, they're often, based on our investigation findings, they barely have any feathers, their combs are all flopped over and really pale, not bright red and vibrant in the way that it naturally would be if they were happy and healthy. And they're just pretty much often in a really terrible state, and then yeah, go straight into the food chain.
Thank you. And the last question we have on Slido right now. Lots of people still don't make the connection between pandemics and factory farming. Why do you think this might be, and how can we try to tackle it?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think it comes down to those points that we've made. Ultimately, it comes down to the fact that there is cognitive dissonance, that people feel that, and I think we've all been there. I certainly felt that way and was completely in denial. And I think that's natural and it's human, and nobody should be beaten up for being that way. We simply just need to make sure that we're using the right tactics to engage with people in the right way and be fair to them and meet them to a point of wherever they are in their journey. And really, ultimately, what we want is for people to reduce and or eventually eliminate, but not to necessarily do that overnight. So I think to be fair to people. I think secondly, we do need to be incredibly sensitive about how we go about this. You know, ultimately, people are dying and people are suffering, and this is a global health threat. And I think that in itself has posed a lot of issues when it comes to people from poorer backgrounds, people from different communities are being treated in different ways and have had many different issues out of it. And I think that is also warranting and requiring some attention too. So I think to bring the animals into the conversation is right and is needed, but needs to be done in the best way. So in terms of how we go about it, so actually Animal Equality does have a campaign at the moment to try to globally ban live animal markets, wet markets essentially, because of the potential link between consumption of animals there and the current pandemic. But what we've found is actually it's attracted a whole new audience of people who otherwise may not have ever wanted to engage with us and may not have had the empathy naturally for chickens. They've now come in because they themselves have directly been affected by our relationship with animals, and therefore they're now on this journey with us through our emails and our newsletters to help them now understand, chip away at the fact that there are actually other issues like avian flu, or their own diet might also have the potential to cause damage too. So I think we need to be careful about being accurate and being credible and being sensitive, but I certainly do think that people are becoming more aware of these issues. The conversation has now started in a way that it may not have been prompted to. I can't say I would wish another pandemic. I can't say I would have chosen for this to be the way that it's done, but I also do think that when these opportunities arise, we need to make the most of them in a really clear and appropriate way.
Okay, thank you. We are currently out of time. So once again, thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Abigail.